Dobrze, witam Państwa serdecznie na...
Welcome to yet another, fourth panel that we are having today. And during the previous three, we have touched upon many different aspects of the video games, and we'll be referring back to them, and we'll try right now to look into different aspects of that. We'll be talking about city as a playground, so we'll be focusing on analog games, LARP games, and at the same time we'll try to keep in mind video games and how these disciplines interact and are interconnected. I have here with me Markus Montola, Michał Grelewski and Sebastian Quack. First we'll show certain things and then we'll have a discussion. Markus Montola will start. He will present himself and what he does. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Markus Montola, as it was mentioned. I'm a doctor of games from the University of Tampere. I did my dissertation on LARPs and pervasive games and location-based games, and I've also been a lead designer of a game called Shadow Cities, which was a massively multiplayer street game where wizards could battle each other between city blocks. Today I'm going to be talking from the perspective of Nordic LARP. I'll pass around a book that I co-edited with Jaakko Stenroos. And I'll go through the basics of LARP really quickly so that everyone knows what I'm talking about. So, LARP is sort of an interactive theater where you go into a game world, pretend to be someone else for a period of time, and that period of time can be anything from 15 minutes to 2 weeks or a month or something. LARP is a performance for the first-person audience, at least that's what we say in the Nordic countries. When I say that LARP is a performance for the first-person audience, I mean that when you're a gangster playing poker against other gangsters, you're of course performing to the other players that I'm the gangster and I've got the cards and I'm, betting and whatever. But the main audience of your performance is yourself. So when you're bluffing the other players, you're performing to the other players that I have really good cards because you're bluffing, but you know that you're bluffing, so you're bluffing to yourself. And the real aesthetic experience in LARP is the feeling of being a gangster in a high-stakes poker, betting your house mortgage and car and whatever with a pair of deuce and losing. And the experience of having that big high-stakes bluff is the first-person audience experience in this. LARP is a thing for the first-person audience, so everything you see in the game is really important because you're in the middle of the graphics. Sometimes we like to say that the real world has the best resolution that you can have. And sometimes we talk about 360-degree ideal or 360-degree illusion. That means that everything you see around you should look like something in the game world. It means that if you start poking into knobs and opening boxes and drawers and whatever, you will always find something that is, again, supportive of the game world. This is our ideal of perfect graphics. That is not very far from if you play Battlefield 4, they are trying to make the same thing. But of course, if you're a LARPer, it means that to stage a game in the world of Battlestar Galactica, you actually have to rent a museum destroyer and then decorate it with all kinds of stuff and make costumes and whatever. But since this is an art for the first-person audience, it's really important that everything looks good to your eye, to many players. Of course, we're talking about city as playground, so when we look at perfect environments where you can play, hiding in plain sight is, of course, the cheapest and easiest one. So you just become a city troll in the new weird fantasy, and you take it to the streets and you meet other players next to the bar and have conspiracy plots, and you ride around the city and try to catch the bad guys and whatever. Of course, since it's theatrical, you're constantly interacting in character. You're trying to portray someone you are not. You're trying to be the city troll, for instance, or a secret agent or vampire or whatever. And it can be pretty powerful experience oftentimes. So emotional and adrenaline highs and lows are very typical when you're really engrossed in a LARP. Sometimes you manage to get just the perfect illusion. Here we have a really small game that 6 players in Denmark made for themselves. They were both the creators and players of this game, and they costumed up to be vagrants in a weird Danish tradition, where they take stuff and walk the earth with a baby carriages and drink beer and see the world. And these players decided to become those road knights, and they set up everything just perfect with the scenography, and they drank so much booze that they passed out, and the game began when they woke up. And then they were in character for 42 hours straight on the streets. And the passing trucks would hail them, because the trucksters hail the road knights regularly in Denmark. And they said that once you're in this state where you smell bad and you look weird and you're in the supermarket and you're running out of money, you really can't just say off game, I'm not really the vagrant, I'm actually a sensible university student somewhere. And when you do this, you can engage and transform the city. This is from a game called America from Oslo, 1999. Where they wanted to portray a very socially conscious LARP about the world drowning in junk, and about third-person citizens living in the middle of junk, and first-class citizens looking down at them from the skyscrapers. So they literally hold tons and tons of trash in a central area and turn that into their playground. And the thing here is that if we accept that LARP can be a game, then we also accept that anything can be a game experience. And when I say anything, I really mean anything. Here is again another picture from a City Troll LARP, where the guys decided to make a band, a troll band. And they really hadn't played or sung anything before. But all the players in the audience were instructed that this is the best band ever. So actually it created one of the best gig experiences in my life, because everyone was so totally into it. Even though the music really wasn't the best music ever, but subjectively to us at that moment it was really awesome. And suddenly being a band leader in the middle of your fans and screaming and stage diving and whatever, that can be a game experience. So I'm just leaving you with this brief introduction to what is Nordic LARP, and with the understanding that you can do it in streets, or you can do it in the forest with rubber swords, or you can do it in a war destroyer in a Battlestar Galactic world. If you want to learn more about LARP, go to nordiclarp.wordpress.com, and you can download the book that I'm passing or circulating around in here, and there will be a lot more for you others to learn about. I think I'll finish with this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. To teraz Michał nam coś opowie.
Now let's hear from Michał.
Tym razem będą to opowieści nie ze Skandynawii.
This time it'll be a story from Russia rather than Scandinavia. My name is Michał Grelewski. I used to design games in Lutz in Poland. A year ago I left for St. Petersburg. I haven't been designing games there, but I'm quite active as a gamer there. St. Petersburg. It's fairly close to Helsinki, geographically speaking. Geographically speaking, mind you, because in any other sense of the word, these two cities are worlds apart, and you will see that in games. Now, a few words about the Russian public space, taking Petersburg as an example, but not only. So let's talk about the space in Russia. There's lots of gold and marble. It's all pompous. Up there you can see a Peterhof palace. It's not really public space, but below there is an underground and a playground, and all these are large-scale buildings, lots of ornamentation, decoration, and that makes Russians happy. What do we have in this beautiful golden space? Well, there are bad things going on, wrong. So it is undermined, it's damaged. Sometimes you see street lights that are broken, or just next to Hermitage, Winter Palace, you have locations which are dirty and ragged and really not all that golden. However, I need to say a few positive words. I went to Russia, and mind you, I'm a Pole. So what did I see? Public space in Russia is blooming. There is lots of flowers and plants, which was quite a positive experience, a positive surprise, possibly the only positive surprise there. Now, the access is not an easy one. So public space there is not all that easily accessible. You cannot go just there, Look at those neighborhoods, at those blocks of flats that are 20 plus high. And you see that there are paths, some of them will be crisscrossed by fence. And let's talk about the Red Square. It's not really accessible to your average John Smith. So on the one hand, the space is huge and there should be enough for everyone there, but access to the space is fairly limited. Unfortunately, cars to control of the space. It is owned by the space. So car there is a symbol of status, and you can see cars parked anywhere. Let's look at the photo below. It's a location 100 meters from Spasmakrovi Orthodox Church, which is the most famous St. Petersburg historical site. And you can just go there and park there for free, and Russians actually do that. Take this opportunity. And there are few spaces for pedestrians only, and that means that city as an experience is not always a positive one. And this, I think, is a very good summary of the Russian visual, of the Russian space, urban space. So we have Hermitage. There is a Claude Monet painting poster on the one side, and on the other we have plenty of ads which don't look all that great, do they? Now let's talk about rules and principles that the Russian public space is governed by. It's kind of interesting. There are many documents on urban policy. There is this idea of open urban space only, so outdoor space. However, the idea of public space is not really highlighted. It's not, let's say, desirable at all to talk about it in these terms. So space there is not really public. Apparently it is not the right time yet. But let's talk about this public space nevertheless. There are two approaches to that idea. Russians, those that live in Petersburg and in other cities, they are still discussing what kind of space it should be, whether it should be alive or not. Maybe it should be rather a postcard that looks great but is not usable at all. There was this famous case. There is the square, the famous square in Petersburg, and it's one of the central focal points. Many local residents go there and tourists as well. There was this beautiful green square, but local residents were banned from using it. It was fenced off and you could go in only using a few entry points, and that was it. So you could only look but not touch or use the space. And another sad truth. If something doesn't belong to me, if it's not mine, I won't care. There are few people in Russia that take care of the space around them. Usually they take care about their immediate surroundings only. And they find it okay to just dump piece of trash somewhere, just like in Poland, mind you.
I jeszcze jedna rzecz taka, to z kolei jest podejście, które już jest stosowane przez twórców gier.
And that, what I'm discussing now, is also used by the game designers. So public space is whatever is accessible, whatever is not fenced off.
Rzeczywiście ci, którzy chcą tam,
So people who want to use public space do so. And they access all kinds of space, even if access is not all that great. So let's imagine that something is fenced off, but the fence is low. People will manage to go across it. And there are some examples of space that are really fantastic and beautiful, and that you can admire. At the same time, other examples are not all that great. What can you do to make things look better? Well, look, you've got an aerial here. Somebody made it by themselves. And there was this muddied area. So people made a pavement. Here you see a roof on one of the tenant houses. And it's a terrace. But mind you, it is do-it-yourself. To access that place, you have to follow a path that would be unthinkable in the EU. But there, it's okay. People think that it's accessible and find it useful. Now let's talk about art. You also can find art that is made out of trash. What is this object made of? Well, of plastic cups. And now other uses of public space. Somebody didn't have any office space, so they improvised and used a fan. And this is a tree of luck, also in Petersburg. Russians try to own this space and take care of the space by taking, well, improvised actions. So you have performances. This is just this average street context. But on the other photo, it was a gift given to the city authorities, because Nevsky Prospect Street is a wide 6-lane street, expressway to be honest, and it was closed for a time, and because of that the space came alive. People went there, and I must say that I was quite surprised that after this short experience nobody was willing to limit city traffic there. There are also some extreme methods to tackle this difficult Russian reality. This is called roof riding. It's quite well developed in Russia, and it takes different forms. What do you see there? Here you see people riding on a roof of a train, and on the other photo you see a set of instructions, what you are allowed and what you are not allowed to touch. And there is also another, well, discipline that involves Russian underground, and there are groups that get involved in that. They exchanged videos, information, experience. So this is quite lively and a community. Let's talk about social activity. It's not as live and lively as in Europe, but it is. It exists. This is Stop Ham, or rather, stop, you're rude. So you can put posters or stickers on certain badly parked cars, and that results in quite lively discussions between those who put stickers on and the owners of the cars. It's very difficult to take such a sticker off because this is the way it is meant to be. So Partinizing is another social movement. It propagates street art. And this is quite an interesting form of art, and people do react to that. Let's imagine that you have such an action introduced in Warsaw. If it happens, you can be sure that there will be other actions, other activities of the same kind in other Russian cities. And the same will be true about games. So let's move on to games, city games to be exact.
Powiem tutaj o grach na przykładach gier Dozor i Encounter. To są gry. Dozor
and Encounter are the two examples that I'm going to use here. They are fairly similar. Differences are minor. Now, what's the difference between their Russian city games and ours, European ones or EU ones? First, let's talk about the system. So, it's not true that a designer will make a game and it is a one-off thing that involves a few dozen people. No. Encounter is a game that involved over 100,000 people altogether, 150. So gamers were involved not only in Russia but also in Poland and in other EU countries. The game mechanics are fairly similar. So there are a few standards. You can play them in any city and they will be just as playable in every city. So let's assume that I found my profile in Petersburg. If I do, I can move to Paris and I can play this game in Paris using the same profile. And if I score there, it will be shown on my profile as well. Now the rules are fairly simple and they are not subject to great changes throughout the gameplay. However, they are fairly flexible. And what does it mean? It means that you can have many variants. Adrenaline. Russians apparently love extreme things. I don't know what it springs from. In the games, it's very often about reaching things that seem to be, or places that seem to be unreachable, about doing things that are extreme. Space is more important than people. Now the main asset of the game is the space that is used. So you have abandoned plants, or military bases, or other city locations that are hardly accessible, for example, city mains. Now, people are attracted to those games because they can explore the city, explore the space. They don't care about other people or other people, yes, but the space itself is used to the maximum. So the Russians use space in this context much better than we do. Now, cars, usually they start in the evening and they end in the wee hours or even in the morning. What is it all about? You drive around and you find locations and you accomplish different tasks. In Europe, maybe we tend not to use cars all that much, or we dislike them, but cars are fairly useful in those games in Russia. It does make sense to use cars, and it's great fun to move from one location to another, using complex navigational tools. I'm not a great fan of the car industry, mind you, but here cars tend to be really, really useful. Thank you.
And Sebastian, the last presentation before we start to discuss.
So yeah, great. This has been really interesting for me as well, so I think I can skip a lot of aspects in my presentation, which is good. I'll try to be quick. I thought what would make sense is to use these 5 minutes to give you a very quick kind of fast-forward trajectory of the types of festivals that I've been exploring with a group called Invisible Playground, which I founded with a couple of people about 5 years ago in Berlin. And we're extremely happy to run a new festival in October here in Krakow. So that's kind of going to be the trajectory of these 5 minutes to just go through the kind of thinking and steps and exploration that's been going on the way. And when we started with Invisible Playground, I mean, the idea was quite simple, to just basically explore what happens when you take a game out of a private setting, like a board game scenario in a living room or in a bedroom or something, and dump it on the street, and you know what happens. And what happens is that there's a lot of interference from other stuff. And you can use other stuff. You can use the traffic lights, for example, in this game, which you don't see, but this is just one small field, and the other field is on the other side of those traffic lights, so the rhythm of the lights is very important to play this game. And of course, a lot of other people, you know, were working on this for quite a while now, and this is actually quite cool because Pac-Manhattan is now 10 years ago, and was one of the kind of iconic games of this form of street games, of what happens when you connect a city space and a game space. And it's also very interesting to think about this in relation to LARPs, because, you know, up on the right side is, you know, a person with pretending to be Pac-Man, but it's just an interesting question, like, how is this different from pretending to be a gangster or a person? You know, he's pretending to be a computer game figure. What does that mean? Do they have feelings? Or, I don't know. Anyway, so this was a huge inspiration for us, and you know, in various places there's been festivals that have sprung up. A lot of you probably know this, but I thought it would be good to name them. I mean, Come Out and Play was around 2005, very important festival that I think for the first time invented actually this format of a street games festival, a festival where, like a movie festival, you go and there's a program of different street games and designers come together and play games out in the city, in different spaces, mostly on the street, mostly on public squares, with this really wacky combination of chalk and high-tech, and balloons and costumes and stuff, and good spirit. So this was very important, and there was lots of groups in UK also very important that kind of copied this model and adapted it and changed it, and we did that too in Berlin and launched You Are Go in 2011, and this is a picture from the You Are Go festival. And this was really all about celebrating, I guess, what you can do with games in public space. And in various different kinds, and really saying, wow, we can do this stuff in public space. And I think at the same time of Invisible Playground doing these kinds of festivals, we also started getting all these invitations from art institutions and started exploring this interesting space between being a group of people that were interested in games and public space and an art world which has its own history of site-specific art, community-based art, participatory art forms, and that were like, hey guys, can we work together and do projects and create games? So at the same time of having this, you know, collaborative, design-oriented, celebrating, wacky pop culture festival spirit, there was this push to go into the art world also, or this pull also, I mean, of course it's also interesting, and explore what you can do with games in various other spaces. So I'm just going to run through a couple of spaces that we've worked in, and I'm happy to talk about that later in the discussion if it comes up. So this is a simulator of, this is an East German simulator of the Berlin S-Bahn, which still exists, which we kind of reactivated for a game, and people created a dinosaur chasing game in this S-Bahn simulator. This is a swinger club in Vienna, where people actually fuck usually, and then well, we play it in between them. This is a hotel lobby in a small town in West Germany. Not so interesting, but different. This is the rooftop of a very new shopping center in Budapest, which is kind of a place where young people hang out and have their first kiss. So this was a game about dating and first love, and like 30 meters below this is this hardcore prostitution area in Budapest, and it was just super weird to do this there and play this game on this roof. This is a very old shopping center in Prague. And this is a very weird shopping center in Japan, which are all completely different spaces, but they're all shopping centers. This is a beach in Holland, where you can only see half of this, but there's actually 200 people running around there and 3 robots, I think. This is a street in Johannesburg, and this is a bunker underneath Zurich. Zurich has a lot, in Switzerland, has a lot of very nice bunkers under it. So if the atomic war breaks out, I really want to be in Switzerland. And this is also from the same project, a decision research lab where you know, scientists study decision processes in real time, and this is a Krishna temple, all from the same kind of game experience tour project that we did there. This whole string of kind of art projects, which involve different strategies, kind of evolved for us at the same time as these festivals. And when we got the funding to do a second festival in Berlin, Play Public in 2012, at the Computer Games Museum, which Andreas directs, we kind of were thinking about games not only as kind of a celebration of, you know, what you can do in this community spirit of doing in public space, but we started to think about games more as a political tool to question public space, or as a space to think and to reflect on what public space is. And this is Karl Marx Allee in Berlin, which used to be one of the main kind of parade streets in East Berlin. And, you know, we had little red flags and thought about Play Public, you know, which is a play on play and republic and building a state and all this obvious stuff. But it was really fun to think about how games could be also models for political systems. And we had people from all over the world there that brought their experience from very different public spaces, like you just described, super interestingly, from Russia or from Johannesburg, to bring their experiences into this question. Then this thing happened, and I just put this World of Warcraft screenshot up there because I was looking for a funny picture to go with these NSA revelations. And I mean, probably some of you know, there's this minor activity that the NSA is also doing, is, you know, surveying online role-playing games and you know, also tracking gaming communities, which is, I find really interesting actually. But I think mainly I just want to pose this as a question, sort of what I think the disappearance of privacy means for playing in public. And this is something I'm thinking about a lot right now. Basically, this is also what we want to explore in Play Public in Krakow, where we think that we can't just say, well, public space exists as a thing that we can go into by leaving private space or something. I think, to me, basically, it's all, we have to reset the whole debate. And so we're reacting to this kind of new situation with a couple of tricks, I guess. And one is that we really are working on a set of very, very different spaces to put the festival in. So there will be private flats, there will be parking garages, a library, the public space. So a broad mix of indoor and outdoor, private, publicly owned, whoever, all different kinds of spaces. And we're currently negotiating permissions with the different parties involved to create games there. And around next week, there'll be an open call to announce these spaces, and you can suggest games for them. So this is kind of the effort to also open up a festival and not think about, you know, us coming in and selecting the games and putting it all together, but to think about, okay, can we open a broad spectrum of spaces in a city and invite, you know, everyone to propose games that go there? So this is a kind of one thing. The other thing that we're changing is to think about just a broader range of games also, of game types. So, you know, we're also thinking about board games in interesting contexts, or browser games in interesting contexts. You know, imagine going to a weird flat and playing a new board game that covers a topic, you know, that you didn't expect, for example. That's something that we find interesting for this festival. And, yeah. So this is going to be cool. And we're really happy to also work with you guys, Michał and Topografie. So this is a collaboration also not only with us coming from Berlin, but also from your group. So this is exciting also to think about, you know, a festival of being a place where, you know, new people can collaborate. So that's great. And just to stop, yeah, so I wanted to start with something big. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Are you the translator? Thank you so much. You're doing such a great job. I was meaning to comment on this because, you know, Invisible Playground, we always look for invisible stuff, so this is like so great to have this invisible person here in this room with us doing the translation, so thank you. And I'm pretty much through. So this is just to end this, I think this is like let's think about not only the city as a playground, because we don't really know what the city is anymore. Let's think about our world as a playground. And not in the sense of, you know, that we know what the world is, but that just, you know, the world includes everything. The world includes digital infrastructure. The world includes all kinds of different places. So it's not just about GPS or coordinates or messages. It's really about everything, and everything can go into the game. And I think LARPs are a wonderful example of that. So that's it.
Yeah, thanks for that, guys. And I think all the activities you presented are super interesting. And Nordic LARP and Play Public, and also those things that are happening in Russia. So just to start and be back to the main subject of our meeting today, are LARP games the opposite or the extension of video games? Or is there any other relations between them?
Okay, how many minutes do I have to answer this?
No, you can, you know, just flow with that.
I think there are interesting things happening that are relevant to the both. So, especially after the MMORPGs came, it's obvious that many MMORPGs are sort of LARPs in virtual space. Of course, that is less true maybe today than it was back then. Back in the Ultima Online was very much a LARP in virtual space, while games after World of Warcraft, they are like Disneyland in virtual space. But I think there are great intersections between games like Skyrim and games like EVE Online and then LARP. So I think there is a great potential from learning back and forth, of course.
The other guys, any more thoughts about it?
I think the question is interesting because you have to think about the body in it. You have to think about like what parts of your body you use in a game as a designer and what parts maybe you replace. So I think game design is a lot about just making decisions about, you know, which real entities to use or to reinterpret in a fiction and which to actually recreate through media, through objects. And I think that's just very different in, you know, in digital games where you get a new body oftentimes. I mean, of course, you're still there, and there's a whole renaissance of local multiplayer games where your actual physical body is also important again, and there's this funny mix. But this is a design decision, and, you know.
In terms of design, they are, of course, quite different because in video games, the most of the time of designer goes into thinking about teaching and communication and affordances and usability and user experience. And in LARP, pretty much everything like that is already given. And then you have to work with this one avatar you have and this one environment you can have and so forth.
So just to sum up, why do we even play LARP anymore? Yeah.
I would add for this. As for me, what is most interesting is something that happens on the border between LARP and video games, and for me something like this it is alternate reality games. These are really interesting things that are involving many different techniques, but the problem with this is I can say from my little experience with this that it is becoming so combined with different things that it is too difficult to play.
There is a kind of ongoing joke in the Nordic LARP community about addressing this. And it's of course about the fact that video games are audiovisual games, while in LARP you have touch and smell and everything going on. So as one famous designer put it, when I have sex in the LARP, I want to feel the penetration. Which is of course one answer to the question. LARPs with actual sex have been played, but they are very rare actually.
And I think maybe there's also gradual differences of this whole full-on role-playing So I think it's interesting to realize that you can get this kind of bodily experience and this 360 multi-sensory experience without having the total role-playing thing in it. So Pac-Man Manhattan, for example, is a great example of a kind of simplification of a personality in a game or of a game figure, because it's reduced to a certain rule set that you perform, and you still are in the space. I mean, of course, the players there also had phones and called back into the base, but the main thing about running through the streets dressed as Pac-Man and going back and forth is that you can actually let go of having to perform a personality, and this is something that games can often, give us, that, we can just relax and be a Pac-Man.
Yeah, I would say logistics and effort are the two things that make me play video games. The problem with LARP is that it's extremely expensive and work-intensive to organize and get all the players in the same place and costuming and whatever. So many in the Nordic LARP community, they play like 1 or 2 games in a year, and they identify as LARPers because it takes so much of their time anyway.
You're talking about like really big events, but it's really easy just to gather 3 people with 1 stick, and you can do whatever. I mean, the main power is probably hidden in this simplicity of imagining things. Yeah, I mean, they need costumes. They need.
The problem with the cheap LARPs is that they all are pretty much alike. So there are like LARP black box festivals where people go into theater black box, and they light it up and they use lights and sound to create environments. But then again, you are putting up production values and putting months and months into a game that lasts for a couple of hours. If you just have a classroom and 5 people, there are some similarities that will emerge because of the form and the logistics.
Is there anything like a professional LARP? I mean, when I'm saying professional, I'm referring to business model.
So there are a couple of business models. One of them is very popular in Denmark, playing with kids. So you have 10 kids per 1 adult, and then you run around forest with buffer swords, and that is actually a sustainable business, not a very good business. But anyway, then there have been some attempts of creating LARPs. Like one group in UK back in the 80s, they rented a castle, and then they played Dungeons and Dragons LARP in that castle, so that people would come to the castle and pay them quite a bit of money, and then they would play for a couple of hours, and that lasted for a few years. Then there are some theaters that make immersive and interactive performances, like Sleep No More in New York. Those groups, oftentimes, they avoid associating with the word LARP, because especially in the Anglo-American countries, the word LARP is probably the worst PR your ambitious artistic theater group can gather. And finally, there are some people who organize like murder mystery dinners for company groups that are pretty expensive for like Christmas parties and that kind of stuff. And that is one more viable model.
So there is a division between like commercial LARPs and outer or artistic LARPs, let's say, yeah, referring to the last panel we've been discussing.
The funny thing with the amateur LARP is that the production values can be extremely much more expensive, because those people are not expecting value for their money. So you can actually spend months on working that. And I think the same applies to street games and adventure games. There was a group at Microsoft who used to make a game series called The Game. And they had participation fees like $5,000 per person per 24 hours. And for that price, you would get like helicopters and whatever.
I think something to add maybe is, when you say production value, it's also about research. So there's an interesting aspect of, I'd say maybe something like level design or scenario design, where you actually scout in the real world to find appropriate locations, like we're doing now in the Play Public Festival, or what you do in Pervasive Larks, where you really have to find a place that fits, or find multiple places that fits, and then you have all the logistics of it, are they close enough together? Are they accessible? You have to negotiate with the people who in the real world, own them or use them for other stuff. And these kind of conflicts are at least something that interests me very much in this kind of work, because there's an interface to a different reality there. And you notice that when playing a lot of times.
Speaking of places, or do we have something to add?
Yes. I have to add something to this what Sebastian said, that Encounter and Dozor are coping with these problems somehow quite well, because
with the budget.
With the budget, yes, there is actually no budget in this game. So players are giving some money to the organizers, and it's about I don't know, 20 euro perhaps. It's different, and it is summing up to a sum of the game, and some of the money are given as a prize to the winner, and some of the money are just given to organizers as for the payment. And there are no costs connected with the places, because they don't negotiate with anyone actually. And
it's also a negotiation tactic.
And also, yes, and also they are not somehow designing adventures. They are not making costume, because adventures are surprising players. If someone got stuck somewhere on the tree, it is an adventure, and it was not prepared by someone who made LARP. It was just in the game.
So theoretically, you can be a professional Dozor winner.
Yes, yes. Probably there are some teams like this.
Okay, guys, so games in real locations versus real locations in games. I mean, which strategy is more immersive? If
I tried to make real locations in games for a while. We were creating a location-based cell phone game, mobile phone game that you would play, and we would use the map of the streets around you, and then we would generate, like, we tried to generate New York for you based on the map data. And it turns out that, and this is of course obvious to everyone who knows a bit about level design and architecture, but we didn't. It turns out that the proportions and dimensions of the real world are really ill-suited for levels. So typically when you play levels in games, you don't realize it, but all the doorways are huge and all the ceilings are really high. And if you try to use real world architecture as is in the game, it's probably going to be really claustrophobic often. Of course you can use some cathedral and get a lawsuit, but that is a different affair, of course.
I didn't understand the question.
Well, I was asking about real locations in games versus games in real locations. I mean, there's plenty games in real locations, but you can't very often see a real location in a video game.
Ah, in a video game?
Yeah, basically, or the other games. Why is that so? I mean,
because I thought
game designers are basically using fantastic, you know, they are building cities from the scratch, and they're not using the real locations. Why?
There's the Assassin's Creed games, which use real locations, and they do it really well too.
Yeah, but this is just an example of, you know, one among thousands. I would like to play in a game that is settled in Krakow, in real Krakow, like with this room and this building included. Haven't seen anything like that before. Why?
One of the most confusing experiences with the virtual architecture in my life. First I went to LA, then I played GTA 3 San Andreas, where they have a virtual rendition of LA. But it's sort of mixed, so that they have taken all the boring places away and all the sightseeing areas are next to each other. And this was pretty confusing in the game because it didn't match my understanding of LA. And then I played GTA to the end, and then I traveled to San Francisco. And that was really weird because I had also played the GTA rendition of San Francisco in the GTA, where there was only landmarks and only cool areas. And then I went to the actual place, and I recognized individual buildings, but they were all scrambled just like the LA had been scrambled in GTA.
So the real space is too boring?
No, it's just, you know, more work.
Okay.
So I think a main, I mean, for example, there's an open source platform called ludocity.org. There's tons of games there. You just have to play them. So I mean, no one knows, like, how many people play these games. And is a board game something that, you know, is in a real location? No one knows how often that's played. I think it's an interesting question because it leads towards who's responsible for what, you know, element of the game experience. Like, are we co-running our own games, or are we depending on a digital infrastructure that somebody else created that we are using to play it? Which is fine. I'm not judging about this, but this is a huge difference. If you go out in a real space, you need to rely on other people. You need to move your body. There's this whole set of actions that you have to take, and that's just more work. It's as simple as that.
Well, speaking from a player's perspective, if you asked if realistic architecture in video games, like landmarks and realistic and cities, kind of shown in a scale of 1 to 1, if they're boring, well, yeah, they pretty much are. I mean, depending on, since level design is like this very important part of every video game, you find often that, like Markus mentioned, that some areas which work very well in video games because they have to be made in a certain way in video games. Let me get an example of a tunnel. Say, in a tunnel, in a video game, you want the tunnel to be quite high, to have its ceiling quite high, because if you want to allow the player to jump, you don't want it for the player character to hit the head. You don't have to do that in a real world, because in a real world nobody will try to jump in that, because it's obvious that you can't and that you'll hit your head, so you don't have to do it. But in video games, you kind of build level design. You create level design so that it fits the kind of game you're making, and like you said, that there are not many games which show realistic areas, like Assassin's Creed was mentioned, but you said it's one among a lot of other games, and I think that's the primary reason. The other reason is, like in Prototype, there was this game Prototype in 2009 or something like that, and it was a game set in New York, basically, and they did the whole Central Park thing, and they did all the buildings, and you could kind of jump on different sort of locations, and to be honest, that was an extremely boring, it was an extremely boring area to play. It was an extremely boring.
On the other hand, I was quite disappointed with Amazing Spider-Man. I wanted to swing in Manhattan, real one.
And you did get Manhattan, but you did get kind of you did get the Manhattan with the Central Park, but it wasn't exactly what you needed, what you wanted, because it's like the only game I can think of which did that very well was LA Noire, and that game was all about recreation of the mood of the plot-wise and kind of the areas as well. You had monuments, you had specific monuments that you could visit, and I'm not sure because I don't know the topography of Los Angeles, but from what I know, that game was pretty accurate in that regard. But I may be wrong though.
Well, I think it's important to think about that. What's fun about using spaces in games is a lot of times that they let you experience a space in a different way. I mean, there's this dimension of getting to spaces where you've never been, which is one strategy, and another one is reinterpretation. And there's sort of a role-playing aspect about space also. So you can kind of redress a space, and we could pretend this is a cave, and out there is, caveman territory or something, and, we're the last humans, and whatever, there's animals outside, and suddenly we have kind of a role-playing element going on about this space. We're fictionalizing the space, and this is something you can do in real-world locations, but if you move into digital spaces, there's less friction in a way. So you have to have a story or something to get similar feelings. Or you can use reinterpretation techniques there too, but it's tricky.
Very early in my career as a commercial game designer, the company I was working for was making a game called City Golf that was golf in Manhattan, and that was the idea, that you were bouncing the ball off of buildings, and it was horrible. It wasn't fun. And one of the reasons was just because golf just didn't work like that. There are all these expectations about how you play golf, and then the idea sounded good, I guess, in the conference room where they pitched the publisher, but then actually making it fun, so it was canceled. And then about 15 years later, I actually come out and play Festival of Street Games. I think they called it Street Putt-Putt or something. It was
Manhattan Mega Putt.
No, this was different than that. This was a real-world version of
golf that you played just on the streets, hitting a ball, hitting a golf ball, and the manhole covers were actually the holes. And that was amazing, because you were having to like negotiate with people and dodge traffic and pedestrians, and they used real world space and all of the texture and complexity of that. And also you were being sort of naughty and inappropriate and, you know, looking for police officers that weren't going to, you know, make you stop playing. So it's interesting sort of what works and doesn't work. I guess I'm agreeing with Sebastian that, you know, that it seems like it's easy to sort of use a virtual space, but all the ergonomics in both cases, I think, really need to be considered.
So, if I can add something, maybe it's all about the story. So, if you speak about, or if you show a game about dragons or zombies or, I don't know, aliens, it's much easier to make a story that's interesting for the player. But if you have a real space like Krakow, you have to imagine a real good story just to attract people. Maybe that's the main problem.
Or you can put zombies here as well.
I would not agree with this, that you have to imagine a story. I think that story is in this place, that story is these people who are getting there, this policeman.
That's what I wanted to say. You have to invent, you have to have a good story, a real good story to attract people to play a game in a place like Krakow.
I want to support Michał here, because I think there's this expression in English which I quite like, is for the story. So, you know, if you play one of these Russian games, you actually create the story. There's no story. They say, go over there and climb on that thing and you'll find something. You create the story. So there's, you know, the player... Right, exactly. The designer doesn't have to create the story necessarily, because... There's also great zombie games in UK, for example. I mean, nothing against zombies. They're great.
Can you imagine a video game based on the same rules? Like you're in a virtual world and the interface is telling you, go there and pick up something. And that's the whole story.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's like there's one reason like that I really like why games are fun, and that's because of difference and friction and clashes. Because they are different from reality. And, you know, if you put them in reality, they clash. And that sort of friction is something that's a driving force. And it's also interesting in digital games, of course, because they're so different from reality as well. They're super different from reality. You can move them closer or farther away in different aspects, and these kind of frictions are interesting, you know, for me as a player.
The funny thing about stories and this kind of games is that when you play this kind of games, stories emerge. You go in somewhere and then the guy was stuck in the tree, and then you tell the story about the guy who was stuck in the tree years later in a conference or something. But try telling me stories about play of Pac-Man or play of GTA or play of most single-player video games you have. And even though those games have embedded stories, they generate stories, and consequently we don't often remember even the stories afterwards. I have no idea what was the story of GTA 3, even though I played it.
Yeah, you're talking about games on the public space and video games, but what happened with, you have both. I mean, you have video games in the public space interacting with the public space. For example, I think in Lumoblox, that was from Mark and Ed, there was a huge screen in the building with Tetris, and you play in the square. It was two players have to move in the square to choose the position of the piece, and another to choose where it's going to fall. And it's people involved playing in the public space video games. Or, for example, the other, I don't remember how it's called, that you have to find some graffitis in some areas, and this become the background of the game and the scenery. So I think the mixture is also really interesting.
I think we're all talking about the mixture, and I would personally, I'm a little bit tired of this clear distinction between the real world and the digital world. Or this is what I mean. Like this thing has digital infrastructure and screens, and all this stuff is in there. And when you design a game, you can use screens, you can use whatever you want. So I would say that we're living in a world that's full of media everywhere, and you can choose to ignore it, but you can also build around with it. You can embed parts of programs in digital infrastructure, And often you can also kind of have a choice where you say, like, for example, counting points. And you can build a sensor system that counts points, or you can have a person standing there. They're basically doing the same thing. I mean, it's a different aesthetic, but you know, people are computers too. So you can. So you know, it's an aesthetical choice for me as a game designer to say I want a human person there that counts the points, or get a programmer and program a sensor system that counts like people moving across a line. You know, that's I think like an art decision.
So does this division, like you're talking about the division between the virtual and the real, but I was thinking like if any of you guys were thinking about the applicability of stuff like Oculus Rift and other stuff which is now kind of going forward. Actually, the technology is pretty much going forward at this point, and we may actually have the first VR device to have actual, you know, constant applicability. Did it cross your mind to kind of include that in your games, and how would that look?
Before you answer, I will just say that leads us to the other question I have for you, and you know it, and it's about augmented reality games. So, Google Glass, Oculus Rift, and the others. Are they a future of video games?
I am afraid of this, personally. I can imagine that there are terrible things happening with this, and people cannot distinct reality from virtual things. And personally, for me, a lot more interesting is reality that is around us, our cities and other people, real people.
I think before the first game for Google Glass that is in the real world that is worth playing, I think that's going to be 10 years away from now. And that's funny because I used to work at Nokia, and we used to make location-based games back in then. I think the first I've been involved with was made in 2003. And since 2003, location-based gaming has been 10 years away. And the virtual reality has also been 10 years away, and augmented reality has been 10 years away. So I think they're still 10 years away. With the Oculus Rift situation might be different.
For me, I think I see it more from as an artist, or also from a political perspective, the question, I think, do we want to play in environments that are totally controlled? You can choose. It's up to you. If you want a virtual reality experience where a designer or a team of designers controls every single detail, knows everything what you do, where there's no privacy, even in a game, you know, you can do that. But you also have other choices. And I think people will want these other choices. I don't really see everyone kind of wanting to go even further in a totally controlled world. I just don't see that. I think there'll be, they're missing something.
One of the beautiful things in street games and LARPs is that they are often like unique instances that cannot really be repeated easily. So when you have those guys wandering the street, like the 6 of them for 42 hours, being drunk and whatever, that's a unique occasion. And when you create unique occasions, it's too expensive to code expensive 3D world stuff for that. So if the future of LARP is in that direction, or if the future of street game is in that direction, then the future is also in repeatability. And that is sort of cool, but with that also comes all the luggage of having to be profitable and having to have professional organizers and having to find the audiences and designing for the common denominator and all that kind of stuff. So I think the cool cutting edge stuff is not going to be very good in that direction.
I wanted to make a remark about these stories in games, that the games you actually tell stories about with your friends are Civilization, XCOM, Sid Meier games, Pirates. You talk about it. They don't have narratives, so it's not redundant. You actually talk what happened, which country were, who attacked you, or in XCOM who died, because people died there. It's really awful. And these are stories you talk about.
You talk about the emergent stories, but not the ones that are fed to you, usually.
So we shouldn't talk about augmented reality yet, in your opinion. I mean, you've been working for Nokia doing this location-based games, and I know that there are some, even in Krakow, there's a company doing this shooter game, I think it's called. Or maybe, and they are doing this shooter. But the weakest... Yeah. We're switching to Polish, so please use your headphones.
Chciałam o to zapytać. I have the following question to you. It's not so expensive as Google Glass. It's cheaper technology, I think, but the result estimate a company that appeared in Poland last year. It's located here in Krakow, and it offers special transmitters that can be attached to wherever you want. They operate non-stop for 2 years and can locate the user with the accuracy of 20 centimeters. We are testing this technology with different games also here in Krakow. The only problem is that if there are, say, 100 people, well, we are made of water, so there are problems with water perspiration. But if it's hanged at the height of 2 meters above the people, there are some problems with location. You just see the location that something is hanging above your heads. We played in the castle of Wawel, and we had lots of fun. But unfortunately, they are quite expensive, and for the time being, there is no guarantee attached. But it might be interesting, I think, for everyone in Krakow.
Dodam, że jakby głównym problemem tego typu eksperymentów jest ta strona graficzna, to znaczy.
Graphic side, I guess, is here especially important. This immersion through the mobile phone. Another one, I understand it is different when you compare it to those glasses, VR glasses or helmets that we expected to have, but we don't.
I'm not saying there's nothing fun you can do with Oculus Rift. I mean, there's tons of stuff, and I would point to, for example, what's happening in Copenhagen, things like Copenhagen Games Collective that are exploring really, really interesting ways to use that stuff by kind of mixing it with the social situation and the awkwardness of having, you know, a thing attached to your head and not seeing anything. And I think there's tons of great games to be developed with this technology, but I think it's not going to be in the way that a lot of people think it will be. And this is usually the case. You know, the fun starts when, you know, something surprising happens. That's not the plan. And when, you know, design starts to explore making connections between different...
Do you think that these glasses, Google Glass or Oculus Rift or whatever they will, you know, give us soon, hopefully, will be an open platform like Xbox Kinect, for example, to experiment with, or would it be cracked or hacked very soon after the release?
I think if they're not an open platform, then they will be cracked and hacked. Yes. So
because you said the fun starts when you can actually cooperate with the system, when it is open, when it is accessible.
I have no idea what those people are thinking, but I would imagine they have to make them open in order to learn what they can do. I think some kind of an app economy is the only way we can ever figure out how to use those things. I don't think those companies can do it by themselves. That's my bet at least.
So they can create technology, but to create content, they need to open the platform.
I don't think Apple had much idea on how to make great apps when they opened the App Store. I know that because at Nokia we didn't open the App Store because we thought that we had an idea. And you know how that story ended.
Thanks.
I've heard about one cool usage of Oculus Rift. It was probably in Norway Army or somewhere like this.
That sounds very cool.
Yeah.
Starting very cool.
And they were, or they are, using Oculus Rift in tanks. So they found that it is cheaper and more effective for the soldiers inside the tank to use just Oculus Rift instead of this Windows, I don't know how to call it. And connected with the fact that that Oculus Rift is now bought by Facebook, yes? Yes, it can be some funny consequences with this, like.
But I'm sure of that.
So Google is buying drones while Facebook is buying the tank piloting equipment. Okay.
So there are large-scale games.
Okay, so I have like
Yeah.
But to be serious, I think the applications where the player is supposed to be sitting down will be the trailblazers at Oculus. So I think it will be formula games and racing games and fighter pilot games that will make or break that platform. Then there might be additional innovation on top of that, but I think those will be the most obvious games that it will be used for.
So the other thing I wanted to ask was, like, is gaming, both LARP and video, capable of accomplishing some greater goals? I mean, there's a lot of energy put in this thing, and yeah, we've been talking about it before, like this all serious gaming, and but I'm thinking, like, it's a real physical activity, LARP. So I know it's for pleasure mainly, but are there any examples of?
Like all other forms of expression, if someone does a lot of work and is creative and clever, they can affect social change. And if they are a nice guy, then they can affect the change for good. And if they are not a nice guy, then they can affect the change for bad. But I don't think it's a magic bullet or anything like that.
I have a strong feeling that games are a possibility to see and experience stuff that you don't usually do, and that this can have positive and negative effects, sure. But I think just bringing people and places together that don't usually meet in that way is something that's quite valuable as a society. So if you say, you know, greater good, then, you know, we can talk about what kind of goods are greater. Yeah, and I think games can do that.
I think most of the games have the problem of preaching to the choir. So mostly the players are the people who already sort of buy the message. There have been some LARPs that are extremely interesting in this regard. I went into a game called Halat Hisar, or State of Siege, last fall, which was replicating the conditions of Palestinian occupation in Finland. We had some Palestinian players playing foreigners, while we Finns were oppressed by the evil Ugaric country east of us. And it was really interesting, in part because it reflected portrayed the reality of occupation every day in the West Bank, but also because we actually played it together with the Palestinians who had a lot of experience from the occupation. And I don't know which part of the game was more influential for me, doing it with those people or doing it. So
we have some questions from.
Yeah, but can LARPs and street games be art? No, I actually have a question. No. So we saw that different public spaces have very different histories and issues and even affordances. Like come out and play. I remember like hearing that. Was invented, that's the festival in New York he was mentioning, was also a reaction to the closure and of public spaces after 9/11, especially in New York City, and plus New York City has an issue of gentrification and very contested public spaces, and we just saw that in Russia is definitely different. Its public spaces are huge and different conception, and so I was wondering, and this might be even like more like a question for the public here. What is the deal with Krakow? Like you're moving here, kind of hovering, but you're not really part of this community. How do you interface with? Like, how do you get a feel, a pulse of the space here? And yeah, please, everybody, tell us.
Yeah. It's a very good question. Very interested to hear also what you guys think. I think one aspect is going to be, do you have a private flat that you want to donate? And what do you want to happen there? So this is more like, you know, do you have access to a space that you could imagine would be interesting to use, and tell us, and, you know, we'll help organize. And the other part is that there's going to be a design camp a week ahead of the festival and an open call. So we're interested in kind of co-creation and collaborative design processes in games, which I think is quite important, that people learn also how to make games and how to create games with their city. And that's a kind of knowledge that is spread around in various places. There's different people that have different areas of expertise, and bringing them together into one place is something that's a chance for people in a city to engage with of course, it's also, you know, super exciting to think about a festival like this as a lens, you know, for people in the city, but also for people that come in from the outside. So, yeah.
Feeling the pulse is also extremely important for LARPs. So when you make a casual, funny game about mobsters playing poker, you don't really import any real mafiosos to kind of give input on how it is to be a mafioso in a high-stakes poker game. But when you're doing a serious artistic statement or comment like the Halat Hisar, then you actually do a lot of homework. You really read up on the situation you're trying to portray, and you very much preferably bring actual people from there who can share their experiences and sort of not necessarily validate or invalidate, but kind of contribute to your experience on how it is to be on the West Bank, so, for instance. And we have been talking a lot about cultural appropriation and kind of trying to avoid shallow stereotypes. So in casual games, obviously the Mafia game was based on The Sopranos, which is, I'm sure, a very super accurate portrayal of organized crime in the United States. We're trying to avoid the Hollywood stereotypes in the more serious games by that kind of background work.
Proszę bardzo. Okay, then you pointed out the tradition lines which you are continuing with your work, and of course they are much older than computer games. But I wonder if this specific kind of works and projects you are doing maybe also are happening in that kind because there were computer games and still are. Or to put it in other words, do you think that you would do the same kind of projects when computer games haven't appeared? So maybe it's a kind of rollback, or you can answer that question.
I mean, yeah, I agree. This kind of work would not be possible without the history of computer games, obviously, because there's a kind of rhetoric in computer games. There's a familiarity with systems, with technical systems, with you know, also this spaces and rules and how humans and technology interact together. That's, of course, you know, exemplified in computer games all the time. So I think definitely digital games opened up, you know, changed our perspective on, you know, the rest of the world also, and that the rest of the world also changed together with computer games. So I think there's a very close interaction between those areas.
But do you think maybe it's also not only related to computer games, but it's an intended rollback back to reality, to real physical spaces? You just touched very briefly that maybe one reason might be the richness which real physical spaces offer compared to complete digital spaces, which are controlled by 100%. Is that maybe something which is also a broader development which you see?
I think we're a little bit past that point. I think there was a phase at the beginning of the 2000s when a lot of people were thinking about, oh my God, we're bringing stuff back into the physical world. Like we're putting the digital on the analog, and we're exploring the city again. And you know, Pac-Manhattan is a great example of that. And I have a feeling that this phase is over. This is 10 years ago, and we're now thinking about how to use the whole complexity of this digital analog mixed environment that we have at our hands right now. So
you're not balancing video games anymore.
Not what?
You're not balancing video games anymore.
Balancing?
It's not like a contrary activity for video games. Because you said you started with like trying to reclaim the city and, you know, interpersonal activities and real world.
It's just not at the forefront of the motivation, I think, for a lot of the designers and artists in this field anymore to bring something from somewhere else and put it somewhere else. This is something that was, had a cultural relevance in a moment, and it was not also like a fight against that. It was just like, hey, let's move, like what artists do, let's move something from here to there and see what happens, right? And that's been done for 10 years now, and now we're moving other things. That's like for example, other spaces. Moving players into other spaces is something that's super interesting. Gaining access to areas in the city where you don't have access, using private spaces. So like, there's an evolution in the kind of shifts and transportations that are interesting to work with, I think.
Could you tell us about examples of the best city games which were using technology and were a kind of breakthrough in thinking of city as a playground?
Playing favorites is always a bad idea. Usually the games that use a lot of technology, they are sort of, and I know this is probably going to be offensive, I think quite often their aesthetic is in a part in novelty, in a part of finding new ways of using high tech, and not necessarily in how the gameplay precisely works, even though they are fun, and not necessarily in their message. And I think the games without technology tend to be more free in their expression in those dimensions. So I'm not sure if I can name a game that is tech-based that would be the one for me.
It's interesting because it's the same with art, actually.
As for me, the important game, I think, was Google Ingress, which was actually based on the games that Markus made a lot of years ago. When it appeared, when I was using Ingress for some months, I was really involved in this, and I thought it is a really cool game. But after some time, it came out that it is just boring as another video game. So it was not a breaking point in my game life.
I think if there is one game that you should play, if you haven't, that is easily accessible, that is Ingress on all Android phones. And I think you should try that.
I think also to connect to what you were saying about alternate reality games, I mean, there's some examples of games, I don't know, classics like I Love Bees, where there's an innovative use of technology by using, for example, payphones and the internet together. And that's something that at least inspired me very much, where you're like, oh, okay, you can do this. It's totally like tech-based, and the internet was a new technology, of course, and the web, using the web to, to organize player activity, to bring people to certain places, and then using another old pre-existing technology in that place. And the game was, you would go to a payphone and you just had coordinates and times of where the phone would ring, and you would pick up the phone like in an espionage film, and you hear this cryptic message, and players, the object was to piece it back together and form a narrative out of that. So I think that was like a really innovative use of a mix of old and new technology and places, and it's a good example of it's tech-based, right? But it's not in the innovative way that you'd usually think of technology.
Another game I would recommend is a web-based game called SF0, which you'll find at www.sf0.com probably. You create a team with your friends, or you join a team with other players, and then you complete challenges that you find from that website. You document that you completed the challenge, and then you post your documentation. Other players vote whether you were good or not. And the fun thing is that anyone can submit a challenge, and the fun thing is that the challenges are really crazy. So an example of challenge is build something that can be seen from the outer space, or eat something that you're scared of, or sleep at another player's home. You can't know that other player before this mission, and that kind of stuff. So they are really looting the anything can be a game experience with their thing. But it's not location based in the sense that you can play it anywhere in the world. It just might send you doing some really weird things in some really weird places. I think one of the cool missions, Jen McGonigal has talked about this, is go into a street corner and wait until something interesting happens.
Okay, since the helicopter flew, we have to finish this nice discussion. I'm sorry, everyone who wanted to ask questions more. Okay, 20 seconds. But,
I have a totally quick announcement because here is the Society of the Players, and I want to tell that I am making an experiment until the 7th of June. I am making the street game on bicycles with apps and multi-medium, and it will be during the Święto Cykliczne Festival for Bikers. And also, it's open for people, but only limited, so it will be. You have to look for this. Zobacz rower. Thank you.
The girl is sitting in the third row. Go there and ask her. Thank you, guys. It was really a pleasure.
To dziękujemy i zapraszamy.
Thank you very much, and I invite you again to the floor upstairs. There will be some wine, some more games. Also, the game in the courtyard will be available. Also, the games upstairs on the balcony still available to anyone interested in playing. You're welcome.